So there's two types of problems we got to deal with. Health problems and impairment problems. Our risks, our choices, and alcohol and drug principles we're going to look at now in this program. We want to prevent and protect. You, Mohammed? Come on in, sir. Take a seat. Join us anywhere you want to sit, okay? We're just starting the program, Prime for Life. Welcome. We just are talking about what we value most and how we can attain these values and enhance them, but not lose them by making high-risk choices, as I'm going to define what that is. So what would most people say? Now, we don't like to talk about cancer, but if you think about it, could anyone get cancer? Possibly. Do you think they could?
Yeah.
Yes. And we admit that. And we don't want to have that. We want to eat healthy and have good diets and everything like that to prevent it. But it could happen to anybody. How about heart disease? Could that happen to anybody?
Yeah.
Now, what about alcoholism and addiction? Could that happen to anybody?
Yes, sir.
Now, this is interesting. You say yes, but you say, I guess so. What about you? Could it happen to anybody?
Yeah. If you could take some one time, you become addicted to it for the rest of your life.
Well, you're hitting on some good points already. But it's interesting what Dondre said, I guess so. And that's an attitude and belief that people think sometimes, well, I don't quite fit into that category, so I don't have to worry about it. And we're going to see the reasons why. Is it the kind of person we are that could develop alcoholism or addiction?
Yeah.
What kind of person? You see a picture up there. This guy looks a little down and out. Does he look like that kind of person?
Yeah, that'd be addicted.
But that could be deceiving, as we'll see. So what do most people say? In reality, what Dondre was sitting on is few people think they're that kind of person that could develop alcoholism and addiction, as opposed to say possibly, well, it could happen to me with cancer or heart disease. I don't want to think about it, but it could happen. So what do you think? The kind of person we are? Let's explore this. How about social factors? Do they play a part in developing the kind of person you are? Yes, and you see up here some examples. How about personality traits? We're going to flesh all these out, but let's keep these explore this. And you ever heard the term addictive personality? Addictive. Is there such a thing as an addictive personality? Some people believe there is, but let's see if there really is. Emotional problems. Could that lead to addiction and alcoholism, do you think?
Yeah.
But this isn't...
That's where it comes from most of the time.
Yeah.
Personal problems and
Most
stuff.
people got
Bills and stuff, and then you realize
resort to violence.
when life gets to you,
Yeah.
you go get the
It's funny, though. They did this 50-year study, and the study kind of shows otherwise. That most people who develop alcoholism and addiction have no emotional problems going in. In fact, they develop the emotional problems after they start drinking and use drugs. 75% of people who develop emotional problems or addiction or alcoholism, they don't have nothing going in. Which means it could really happen to who? Who could it happen to? Anybody. And that's a key to think about as we move along. So are you anybody? We're all anybody, right? So it could happen to me, it could happen to you. How could it happen to us? We're going to look into the reasons. For many people, high-risk use leads to more depression and anxiety. Now, when people abstain, what does abstain mean? Abstinence.
Like you block it out.
You don't use it completely, you just cut it out. You don't drink, you don't smoke, you don't use drugs. And that's not...
There's not a lot of people that you run into that don't do one or the other.
Well, you know, it's funny you say that, because we'll see that the most people in this, like there's 35 or 45% of the people in this country that don't drink at all. They just don't drink.
At all.
Yeah. But if you're hanging around with people, if you drink and you're hanging around with people, they probably drink too. So you might think more people on a whole do it than you do. But this class isn't about abstinence necessarily, but it's to understand how much you put in your system and what's high risk, what's low risk, as we're going to get into. So 75% of people did not self-medicate. 75% who ended up with the problems, they did not self-medicate. So what is it? Alcoholism or addiction? What comes first? The emotional problems and then the addiction and alcoholism, or does alcohol and addiction come first, then the emotional problems? Most of the time. It could. Let's take a look at this video here.
I started off as this kid who was really well behaved, and I did everything my mom said to do. But when I started drinking, I became really angry, and I didn't know why, and depressed.
I was mainly doing alcohol because I was depressed, and it seemed like alcohol was relieving the depression, but it was actually causing more depression, even though I thought it was taking away the depression.
You know, in a very gentle way, that counselor sort of got me to realize that maybe it wasn't that I was drinking because of the problems I was having, but that the problems I was having was because of the drinking. And so I just eventually kind of came around to realizing that that was maybe the piece that I needed to take care of.
Personality changes. Have you noticed? When people drink or use drugs, their personalities change.
100%. You get more aggressive.
They get more aggressive. What else?
Say what's on your mind, no one mind.
No, yeah, you let everything go.
Yeah.
All your feelings come out,
Yeah.
your emotions. If you
Alright.
hate this person, they're gonna know.
Yeah.
If you love this person, they're gonna know.
Have you heard of a happy drunk? Like a guy who drinks and gets happy.
Yeah, I know a few people that drink and start crying, get emotional. I love you, this, that.
Then some might get angry, some might get mean, right?
Yeah, I know a few of them.
Or depressed. So it varies, but it does affect us. So does someone need to have emotional problems before they can develop alcoholism or drug addiction? Based on what we've covered so far, does someone need to have emotional problems to develop it?
No.
No. Some may, but we did that study and 75% did not.
I have problems.
So that the vast majority did not have the emotional problems going in. Happy, healthy people also have a risk to develop alcoholism and drug addiction. Do you buy that? You're not sure, huh? That's okay. We don't want uniformity here. We don't want you to just rubber stamp everything. But people who are happy, healthy, they also have risk too. It boils down to how much you take. And we're going to look at what's high risk and what's low risk. And what's... So what most people say, if alcoholism and addiction are not caused by the kind of person I am, then what does cause it? So we're going to look at heart disease as a lifestyle-related health problem, and then compare it and contrast it to alcoholism and drug addiction. Because we all already said that it could possibly happen to any of us, heart disease. So let's see how that works. There's two kinds of risk. Risk we can change, and risks we cannot change. For example, let me ask you about this. Smoking. Can we change this or not change this in terms of our life?
I think you can change that.
How about exercise level?
Yeah.
Weight?
Yeah.
Cholesterol level? Amount of fat and cholesterol in our diet? Male relatives with heart disease? Can we change that?
No.
No. Female relatives with heart disease. Activity level.
Yeah.
The amount of meat, eggs, fruits, and vegetables in the diet. So the vast majority we can change, but there are a few things that are biological that we cannot change. And we got to understand our own biology as we're going to look at it and see. So there's two kinds of risks. The biological risks are we can't change, and our choices we can change.
Who has risk for heart disease? Everyone does, but not everyone has the same level of risk. We're all born with a certain level of biological risk. We can't change that. What we can change is the risk created by our choices. Together, our biology and our choices determine whether we develop heart disease or not. We can think of this as a formula. Biology plus choices equals outcome. This is a basic formula to understand risk for all lifestyle-related health problems, like heart disease and many of today's other leading health problems. Let's take a look at the role each piece plays. First, biology. All humans have certain things in common. We all have a body, and our bodies have inborn risks for various health problems. Yet we are also different, and each of us is born with a different level of risk for heart disease. There is a point where heart disease could be triggered. We're going to call this threshold a trigger point. It means the point at which heart disease begins or is triggered. Anyone can develop heart disease, but the risk varies from person to person. Some people inherit increased biological risk, and this means they can trigger heart disease easier than the average person. For example, people who have multiple family members with heart disease are more likely to develop heart disease themselves. The younger those people were when heart disease developed, the greater the biological risk. Some people have less biological risk. This just means it will take longer to trigger heart disease. And some people have risk that falls in the middle. Different people have different levels of biological risk, but everyone has some level of risk. Think of it like this. If we were on a journey to a destination, let's say the Pacific Ocean, some of us live in the West, so we would have a very short path to take before we arrived. And for some of us, say those who live on the East Coast, it would take much longer. And then some of us may live in the Midwest, and it would be in the middle. Now, choices. While we cannot change our level of biological risk, we can change the risk created by our choices. Our choices affect our bodies in a way that determines whether or not we will reach our trigger point. Choices refers both to quantity and frequency, how much and how often we engage in behaviors that can either increase or decrease our risk for heart disease. Let's go back to that trip to the Pacific Ocean. Choices such as how fast we drive or what exits we take will help determine our arrival time. Choices that increase risk for reaching our trigger point for health problems are called high-risk choices. Choices that are not likely to trigger health problems are called low-risk choices. Now let's talk about low-risk choices in regard to heart disease, so we have the information we need to prevent that lifestyle-related health problem.
Don't smoke. Eat 6 servings of grain products per day. Eat 5 servings of fruits and or vegetables per day. Bake, broil, or roast foods instead of what? Frying. Good. Use all vegetable oils instead of animal fats and butter. This was all taken from the American Heart Association. So those are low-risk choices. Your diet is low risk or high risk. But the biological end of it, meaning who's closer to heart disease than others, you don't have control over. If you have a family history of heart disease, then you're apt to get there quicker than other people that don't have it, but both of you could get there with your high-risk choices. But the thing we want to prevent is for you to trigger heart disease, because once you trigger heart disease, how long do you have it for? The rest of your life. Now,
So they could kill you earlier, or it just
it could, but fortunately for us, we have medicine, right? They give you pills and things like that, and that mitigates it. That makes it tolerable. But in an ideal world, you don't want to trigger that, right? Or like people trigger diabetes. Once they get it, they have it, and then they take medication or high blood pressure. So we all have trigger levels. But our choices, we have total control over.
I just had to stop eating all the greasy food and stuff because I caught kidney stones from that.
Kidney stones?
Drinking soda and all the grease and everything. That thing hurt like that. That's the worst thing to ever.
I bet. I've heard about that
I
myself.
thought I just had gas, and I was at work, and I had to go to the ground. I had to get an ambulance to pick me up and everything.
Did you pass the kidney stone?
Yeah, it was a little one this big.
Yeah.
One, and it hurt like.
Wow. I've heard.
Imagine the big ones that go down. And,
I've heard that from
man,
other people.
They locks you up. I couldn't even talk to nobody. Like you can't move, none. I tried to work through it. I was like, it's probably gas. Man. It
So
got worse.
did they tell you what brought on the kidney stones, or?
Just how I eat, they said I gotta control my diet. Cause I always drink soda. I've been doing
Soda, your diet,
all that grease and everything. That's
grease.
what I did.
All right. So is low risk the same for everyone? Does everyone start out at the same risk level?
No.
No. Because we have our biology to contend with. So we've got to understand our biological background. Is biological risk the same for everyone? So you can see the different figures. This guy in the yellow is further away from heart disease than the guy in the green, and the guy in the blue is the closest. So his biological risk level is the greatest to develop heart disease. But if he makes low risk choices in terms of eating, diet, and everything, he won't get to that point, but he can get there quicker.
Can you be born with that? If it's in your family? Or it just comes on up?
It just runs in the family history. You're not born with it, but you have a propensity for it. If, say, you have a family history.
You have a better chance of getting it.
What?
You probably have a better chance of getting
Yeah, if you make high risk choices, if you eat the way you eat and drink and everything that goes against things for preventing heart disease. And you mentioned kidney stones, which is very interesting.
Man, those things hurt. And I only had one. I
That's
saw
all it
people
takes.
with ones like this.
Right.
Multiple of them. Mine was like 3 millimeters, I think the lady said.
Wow.
And it felt like it was one like this going down.
No, I heard about
They
that.
said when it goes down that little tube, that's when it kills you. That's when it hurts the most. Because they got to squeeze through and go down.
Well, thanks for the example. That fleshes this out.
Mm-hmm.
This is a research-based program. Low risk is not the same for everyone. Our choices are what's most important, as we're going to see. Our psychological influences, they affect our choices. So, this is important. Attitude, preferences, traits, values, these all affect our choices. You can challenge these values and attitudes and preferences and change them. You can't change your biology, which you're born with, but the choices you can change, you have control over. So it's not that easy always. Sometimes people have to go to therapy or explore it and things like that. Social media, friends, do friends influence you and your choices?
Yeah.
The media. Does the media want you to drink?
That's they show a lot of them.
There's a lot of ads out there, aren't there?
They promote it more than anything.
Are they concerned about you and your health?
They're concerned about the dollar.
That's right.
That's
They're trying to make money with it.
Your friends, your social norms, your family. I've had a guy at a program once, he said he came from a country in Eastern Europe where they drank, he was drinking at 10 years old. They were drinking vodka and stuff, and
Yeah,
it was,
people, they drink.
it's part of their custom. And then he challenged it because it got him in trouble, and he had to stop it.
10 years old, I don't know how he took taking anything down.
Well,
Once you lick that thing, I still, it bothers me right now.
I mean, I've heard of people like in families, the children, they give them a little glass of wine or something like that at a certain age, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but anytime you put alcohol in your system and you don't, if you end up doing too much, it can lead to problems, as we'll see. But sometimes they say that makes people, I've heard people say that made them where they don't really want to drink that much because it's just part of their everyday life growing up in their family. That's a good case. But that other case, the guy was talking about the vodka, and he was drinking too much vodka now. And he had started when he was real young. So it can go both ways.
I don't know, some people can drink every day.
Oh, yeah.
I don't even know how that works, because once you drink at one time, I'm good. I don't need nothing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
We're going to look at that. How much can you drink in a week and make it low risk? There is a low risk drinking formula. And that's interesting because you can drink at a low risk level. You can actually have up to 14 drinks in a week and be low risk. But it has to be 2 a day.
Oh.
And we're going to get into that more as we get into the program, but it has to be an hour apart too. And it has to be a standard drink. One beer, like a Budweiser or a Heineken,
Wine,
Corona,
something like that.
12-ounce beer, or a 5-ounce glass of wine, or 1.5 ounces of alcohol, like whiskey or vodka or gin. They're all equal to one standard drink. So that's interesting to know. So our biology and high-risk choices lead to heart disease. And that's the example we're using first. But the low-risk choices, and you've heard of people, they're heavy and they're overweight, and then they go on a diet and they start to exercise. And then the doctor takes tests like cholesterol and stuff like that. And what happens to the levels? They go down. And they move away from that trigger point, which is good. So what does this have to do with alcoholism or drug addiction? We were talking about the heart disease example. Now we're going to tie it into what it has to do with alcoholism or drug addiction. Alcoholism and addiction are also lifestyle-related health problems. We have a biological level, but then we have some brain changes that occur. Let's see what they mean by this.
When researchers recorded the brain activity of people looking at images of their favorite brand of beer, those with a history of making low-risk drinking choices had this kind of brain response. The brain region activated here helps control our impulses. It's as if their brain is saying, "That looks good, but I can't have it now." But scanning the brains of those with a history of high-risk drinking choices showed a much more powerful change. When they saw pictures of their favorite drink, their brains activated regions linked to attention, smell, and desire.
See how
The
it,
brain response to just a picture of their beer
you see the color
made
in,
drinking feel more urgent to them. We would see similar changes in brain responses of those making high-risk drug choices if they smelled marijuana or heard cocaine being cut into lines. Why does this matter? Because as people move toward addiction, one of the most powerful changes they experience is a growing craving for their substance. The change seen in these brain scans signal movement toward a trigger point for addiction, where the craving becomes overwhelming.
so the more you take, the more it affects you and it makes you want it more. So biological risk is not the same for everyone. So like you're saying, are you born with alcoholism? You're not, but if you're in a family with alcoholism, you have a greater risk of developing it with your high-risk drinking choices. And they did an adoption research study, which we're going to look at. That many things tend to show up in families. They did family studies. They did adoption research in Denmark, Sweden, and the United States. So what does this show, the adoption research? Let's take a look.
Many people know alcoholism runs in families, but often they believe it's because of the environment. By looking at adoption research, we can answer the age-old question of nature versus nurture. Does it run in families due to biology or environment? Well, adoption research found two interesting things regarding the risk for alcoholism and drug addiction. First, everyone has some biological risk of developing alcoholism or drug addiction. And second, some people have increased biological risk. Want to know how? Check this out. First, researchers looked at children whose birth parents had no history of alcoholism. Some of those children were adopted by families that didn't have alcoholism either. But some of the children were adopted by families where a parent did have alcoholism. And guess what they found? As adults, both groups of children ended up developing the same amount of alcoholism. This indicates that everyone has some biological risk of developing alcoholism. Now, how did researchers show that some of us have increased risk? Well, here's what they did. This time, they observed two separate groups of children. Some had birth parents with alcoholism, and some had birth parents with no alcoholism. Both groups were adopted by families with no alcoholism. And guess what they discovered? In time, the children whose birth parents had alcoholism grew up to develop 4 times more alcohol-related problems than those whose birth parents did not have alcoholism. And what about drugs, you ask? Well, one study found that having a mother, father, brother, or sister with a dependence on marijuana, amphetamines, or prescription sedatives increases the risk for drug problems too. Even a family history of alcoholism increases the risk for more drug problems if a person chooses to use drugs. So, these studies show we all have some risk, and some of us have even more risk due to genetics.
So what do you think of that? It's interesting, huh? That alcoholism runs in families because of increased biological risk. So how many times greater of a chance do you have to develop alcoholism if it runs in your family tree compared to someone who doesn't have it? 4 times. So let's just say you were had a stepbrother and you guys were in the family and you're growing up and you're 18, 19, 20, you guys start partying and you're basically drinking the same thing. But all of a sudden you develop alcoholism. You have a big problem. But your stepbrother doesn't. Now, why? Because both of you had a family, your biological family had alcoholism, and his did not. So you're getting mad. You're going, geez, he drinks more than me even, and I'm having a problem. But the reason is because of that biological risk. Now, does that mean he doesn't have to worry about developing it, the other guy? He could get there eventually too, but his trigger level is higher. It's going to take more time. But if he keeps pushing it, he's going to get there too. But that's the way it works. Unfortunately, some people develop it, they hit their trigger point, and later on in the course we're going to talk about how that leads to addiction. And then it's like with heart disease, once you get it, you can't get rid of it. And the only way you can stop alcoholism and stop it in its tracks is only one choice. And what's that? That's called abstinence. And that's too bad if you like to drink, because some people really dig drinking. And that's one of the reasons they do drink, is they enjoy it so much. And that's a factor that can lead to high-risk choices and beyond.
Makes you feel good, I guess.
Oh, yeah, it makes you feel good.
Put you in a good place.
Yeah. No more reason, I guess.
But there's an interesting component, is alcoholism, is alcohol a stimulant or a depressant? Yes. So it's ironic, because you drink and you feel good, but what happens when it wears off? You get depressed.
Because all your problems come back. Now you woke up with a hangover and you're like, shit.
I had a lady in this program once who, she said, Dave, that stuff we talked about last week got me really depressed, about the drinking, because I had taught this for 5 years, and then we went to the Change Company, but now I'm doing this again, which is a great program here. Already you guys are responding a lot better than my other classes with the Change program ever did. But anyway, She goes, you got me depressed. I go, I'm sorry to hear that. I go, did you drink between last week and this week? And she said, every day. So do you...
So since he left you last Monday,
Every day she drank, yeah, to the next week, yeah. So that means she was depressed, but do you think drinking every day added to her, making her depressed, right?
more depressed.
Yeah.
She probably drank since she left there.
After she heard what you said, that she probably went.
Well, you know, she struck me, she's a middle-aged lady, as a social drinker, probably at home, drinking cocktails or at bars or whatever, you know, and they have their rituals and they drink and they can hold it somewhat, but then we have these impairment problems that occur. And this is when you're drinking and driving, of course, you can get arrested, or even if you're not drinking and driving, you can fall down, you can get hurt and things like that. So as adults, 4 times greater risk for alcoholism and drug addiction if you have it in the family history. But that doesn't mean if you don't have it in the family history, you can't develop it. So we have biological differences in responses. So people, like you said, it makes you feel good, more pleasure, right?
Makes you happy.
Does that make you want to drink if it makes you happy?
Yeah,
Of course.
Like you said,
Why
I'm
not?
going to a party, I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
I'm going to drink, but you ready to go do that.
And you saw that video, what happened to the brain when people started
You get
to...
excited.
Yeah. It actually changes the nature of the brain. Yeah.
What we said, a bar or what?
So you're not going to a bar to drink water, you know?
Of course not.
There are some people, though, that initially when they drink, they have a negative response. Like, oh, I remember when I was like 12 or 13, I drank beer for the first time. And I don't know if you remember, but oh man, that tastes terrible, like that. And then,
Nasty to me to this day.
but why do people end up drinking it, even if it tastes terrible?
But you have enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the first one.
Yeah, then you start to say,
Good.
and then you start to say that tastes not too bad at all, really. Yeah.
Everyone, you never taste
But-
nothing no more.
But for the ones, and with marijuana too, some people like they don't like smoke in their eyes and their face.
A lot of people can't take the smell. You know?
That negative, if you have a negative response like that, are you going to continue or maybe back off on it if you have a negative response? It's a good chance, yeah. So that could really be an asset, but unfortunately, a lot of people have a positive response to it, and that encourages them to do it more.
That's not good.
You gotta try. And that's how it goes.
So they did a 25-year study on this. They studied family history and high tolerance. Now, we haven't gotten into tolerance yet, but tolerance is like building up your strength to drink and to hold it. I always use the parallel to going to the gym and working out. If you work out and you start lifting weights,
You do more and more.
and then the same with drinking in a different way, the more you drink, the more you can handle it.
The more you want.
And the more, yeah, and that gives you a false sense of confidence, as we'll see. Sometimes people think that makes them invincible, but really it sets you up to get into more impairment problems and more trouble.
I worked with a guy that had a problem with drinking. If he be 8 in the morning, he needs 2 shots. If he don't drink, you see him like shaking and
Yeah.
like itchy. And you see him running, he needs it. His body needs it.
Later on, we're going to look at the phases of use, and that sounds like the addiction phase.
And he went through this DUI, everything, but every
Yeah.
morning when we at 8 o'clock, he's taking shots.
Yeah, that's
I was like, you crazy, man. I can't even do it.
that's pretty hardcore to be taking shots at 8 in the
8
morning.
in the morning.
Yeah,
You
it
got
really is.
And if you see him not, if he don't take it, you can see him shaking while he working, his hands and everything.
So this 25-year study really enabled, see, like I said, this is research-based. And what about drugs? Marijuana. Now it's legal in New York State, medically and recreationally. You know, in some states in this country, it's not legal either, medical or
Oh, they don't
Legal.
medical people?
not in Kentucky, for example. It's not. I was talking to some instructor from Kentucky, and she said it's not legal either medically or so.
Do you feel marijuana is worse than cigarettes?
Well, marijuana, no. Well, cigarettes are
To your body.
they'll kill you. I mean, that cause.
Cigarettes are worse.
Oh yeah, I mean, I wouldn't argue with that at all. You know.
That's what you said. Now you can go downstairs and buy a pack. I know
Facts.
that's all about the money.
Money, yeah.
Well, I say, you know, all poisons are not equal, right? You know? So we're going to see why drugs across the board, there's no low risk choice, but there's low risk choice for alcohol. Like I said, 14 drinks in 1 week, 2 drinks a day. There was this guy in DR that was in this drinking contest. Who can drink a fifth of Patron the fastest, right?
I saw a few of those videos, man.
The winner got $500.
The outcome of it.
The young guy who was 20 years old or so drank the whole thing, and he passed out. They took him to the hospital, and he never woke up.
Yeah, I think I heard about that.
Yeah, really? Now the thing is
I don't know how they do that.
that was for a purpose, for a contest. But normally you wouldn't grab a bottle and drink it like that, would you? But think about pills. 2 or 3 pills, could that of the right kind of drug? Are they easier to take? Of course they are, right? So that's one reason. But marijuana, let's look at marijuana, because this is the gray elephant in the room nowadays. More pleasure, more use, right? So we have some people describe marijuana use, and they use adjectives. And the more positive adjectives they gave, the more likely and the more they would smoke. So you get high. High is a nice positive word when it comes to that, right? Relax, happy, silly, laugh.
That's what comes out of it.
Yeah. So if people gave these positive responses, the more they gave, the more likely they were to use at a greater level, as you see up here. From 1 positive response to 3 to 5. 5 positive responses, give them all the above, right? If you said, did the survey, would you put all of the above? That's 23.5 times greater chance to use it compared to someone who does it. So what role does biology play in this? Once again, there's a trigger point. Now, the trigger point is set. Our biology sets up where we are in relations to the trigger point. But our choices are what gets us there if we make enough high-risk choices over a long enough period of time. You could always stop before you get to your trigger point, as we'll see, and move away from it. And that's good. So about marijuana and alcohol frequency. Let's take a look at this and we'll finish up for the day.
Several large studies followed thousands of children as they grew up to see what predicted marijuana use and marijuana dependence. What did they find? We know people first try marijuana for a lot of different reasons. Curiosity, rebellion, or to fit in. Other people had conduct problems influencing their use of marijuana. These are people who can struggle to obey rules and control their impulses. That group was more likely to start using marijuana by age 15, well before most others in their age group. However, as the whole study group aged, others who had no behavior or emotional problems also started using marijuana, often out of curiosity. But does the quantity and frequency a person drinks or uses drugs lead to dependence? To learn more about what leads to marijuana dependence, researchers studied users who were 18 years old and not yet dependent. The researchers followed that group to find out who became dependent by age 21. They divided the people into 4 groups based on how often they used marijuana at age 18. There was a non-using group, a group using less than monthly, those using at least monthly but not weekly, and a group using at least weekly. And researchers found the probability of developing marijuana dependence by age 21 was directly linked, more than anything else, to how often people were using marijuana at age 18. Surprisingly, it did not matter why they started using. The quantity and frequency of marijuana use was the most powerful predictor of who would develop marijuana dependence. Even in a group of people not using any marijuana at age 18, a small number of that group began using marijuana and developed dependence by age 21. This is our comparison group. What we need to know is how much more likely it was for those already using marijuana at age 18 and using it more frequently to develop dependence by age 21. Research found the probability of developing marijuana dependence nearly doubled in the group using less than monthly, with over 3 times more risk in those using at least monthly. those using at least weekly had more than 6 times greater risk of becoming marijuana dependent. What about alcohol? People also began using alcohol for many different reasons. But, just as we saw with marijuana, the quantity and frequency of high-risk drinking predicts alcohol dependence. For example, researchers found men who have 5 to 8 drinks on any day are 9 times more likely to develop alcoholism compared to those who drink only 3 to 4. Men having 9 to 16 drinks in any day have 49 times more risk. Among women, the risk increases 24 times for those having 5 to 8 drinks in a day, and 102 times for those having 9 to 16 drinks in any day.
So that's interesting. I think you can see the more you use and abuse, the more likely you're going to develop problems. That's common sense, right? So just to sum things up for today, our biology and our choices lead to an outcome. We looked earlier before you came in about what we value most. And think of someone in your life whom you would like to share the most important things we have explored so far in this program. What would you tell this person? If you go home tonight and you tell someone what you learned today or you were presented, what would you say? Anything?
On tolerance, on drinking.
What?
On tolerance.
Tolerance?
And drinking. And
Drinking?
how much you can drink.
Yeah, we're hitting it. We're just scratching the surface now. We're going to get into details more and more as this goes on, but this was a great start today.
So we're going to learn this all the way to the end.
Yeah, this is a program now, Prime for Life. It's a great program. Like I said, I took a workshop. I had training 10 years ago, and I had to take new training again. But this time it was on Zoom. And now this is the lesson I presented to you guys. The first one on Prime for Life since it was enacted August 15th, starting now. But you guys did a great job, and we'll talk about this. We'll pick up where we left off on this next time. So thanks a lot, you guys, and we'll see you next time, okay?
Thank you.